In the heart of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré sat in his office, surrounded by the quiet hum of a nation on the cusp of change. It was a warm morning in April 2025, and the air carried a sense of purpose. Traoré, a young and resolute leader, had spent years steering his country away from the grip of foreign powers. His policies, bold and unapologetic, challenged the influence of Western nations that had long shaped Africa's fate. Now, a new opportunity beckoned, one that could redefine Burkina Faso's place in the world. An invitation had arrived from Moscow. President Vladimir Putin had personally requested Traoré's presence at a historic summit celebrating Russia's enduring strength and its growing ties with African nations. The event promised to be more than a diplomatic gathering. It was a chance for Burkina Faso to stand tall, to declare its independence on a global stage. For Traoré, the trip was a symbol of his nation's defiance, a signal that Africa could choose its own allies without fear. As he prepared for the journey, Traoré knew the risks. The United States and its European allies, particularly France, had watched Burkina Faso's pivot toward Russia with growing unease. In closed-door meetings, Western diplomats had warned that any move to deepen ties with Moscow would face consequences. Burkina Faso, they insisted, could not afford to defy the powers that controlled global finance and trade. But Traoré was undeterred. His people had endured centuries of exploitation, and he believed the time for submission was over. The morning of his departure arrived. Traoré boarded a sleek presidential jet at Ouagadougou's airport, his heart steady but his mind alert. The crew, handpicked for their loyalty and skill, understood the weight of the mission. This was no ordinary flight. It was a statement, a challenge to the old order. As the plane lifted off, slicing through the clear African sky, Traoré gazed out the window, watching his homeland fade below. He felt the pulse of history, the stakes higher than ever. Hours into the flight, the jet cruised smoothly over the Atlantic. The crew maintained constant vigilance, aware that crossing international airspace could invite scrutiny. Traoré sat in the cabin, reviewing his speech for the Moscow summit. His words were meant to inspire not just Burkina Faso, but all of Africa. He spoke of unity, of breaking free from the chains of neo-colonialism, of forging a future where African nations stood as equals. The speech was bold, and he knew it would provoke the West. Then, a subtle shift in the cabin's atmosphere broke his focus. The co-pilot's voice crackled through the intercom, calm but urgent. Radar had detected two fast-moving objects approaching the plane. The crew's training kicked in, their eyes scanning the screens. The objects were no civilian aircraft. They were military jets, closing in with precision. The radio remained silent, but the message was clear. Someone wanted to stop Traoré's journey. The crew exchanged glances, their training battling the rising tension. Traoré leaned forward, his voice steady. "Identify them," he instructed. Moments later, the answer came. The jets bore the markings of the United States Air Force and the French Air Force. This was no mistake. It was an interception, a calculated move to halt Burkina Faso's defiance before it reached Moscow. The hum of the presidential jet's engines filled the cabin, but a heavier silence gripped the crew as the radar confirmed the presence of American and French fighter jets. President Ibrahim Traoré sat upright, his eyes sharp with resolve. The interception was no surprise, yet its audacity sent a chill through the air. The West had chosen to act, not with words or sanctions, but with raw military power. This was a direct challenge to Burkina Faso's sovereignty, a warning that Traoré's journey to Moscow would not go unanswered. The radio crackled to life, breaking the tense quiet. A stern voice, unmistakably American, cut through. "Burkina Faso 1. This is United States Air Force Command. You are entering restricted airspace. Divert your course immediately and prepare to land at the nearest designated airfield. Noncompliance will result in consequences." The French jet, flying in tight formation, echoed the demand in clipped tones, its pilot reinforcing the ultimatum. The message was clear: turn back or face escalation. Traoré's mind raced. The restricted airspace claim was a flimsy pretext, a diplomatic fiction to justify their aggression. His flight path had been cleared through international channels, and no prior warnings had been issued. This was not about protocol. It was about power, about stopping an African leader from aligning with Russia. The West feared the message Traoré carried, the vision of an Africa unbound by their influence. He turned to his chief aide, a trusted confidant who had stood by him through Burkina Faso's turbulent years. "They think they can intimidate us," Traoré said, his voice low but firm. "They think we'll bow to their threats. But Burkina Faso is not their colony." The aide nodded, his expression mirroring Traoré's defiance. The crew awaited orders, their hands steady on the controls, ready to follow their president's lead. Traoré addressed the captain directly. "Maintain course. We do not divert. This is our right, our sovereignty. They will not stop us." The captain, a veteran pilot with nerves of steel, acknowledged the command with a nod. The jet continued its path, unwavering, as the American and French jets flanked it, their presence a constant menace. The situation grew precarious, each passing minute tightening the knot of tension. The radio crackled again, the American voice colder now. "Burkina Faso 1. This is your final warning. Divert now, or we will take necessary measures." The French pilot added a similar threat, their words synchronized in a show of unity. Traoré felt the weight of the moment. A wrong move could spark an international crisis, perhaps even war. Yet surrender was not an option. To land would be to admit defeat, to signal that Africa remained under Western control. As the standoff intensified, the crew monitored the radar with growing unease. The Western jets maintained their positions, their maneuvers precise and aggressive. Traoré sat in silence, his thoughts a whirlwind of strategy and resolve. He had anticipated resistance, but not this brazen display of force. The world, though unaware, was witnessing a pivotal moment, one that could reshape global alliances. Then, a new signal appeared on the radar, faint at first but growing stronger. The crew's eyes widened as they identified the source. For jets, moving swiftly from the northeast, approached at high speed. Their transponders marked them as Russian Air Force. A surge of hope coursed through the cabin. Help had arrived, unexpected and unannounced, shifting the balance in an instant. The arrival of Russian fighter jets changed everything. President Ibrahim Traoré, seated in the cabin of Burkina Faso's presidential plane, felt a shift in the air, though the engine's hum remained steady. The radar now showed 4 Russian MiG-35s, their presence a bold counter to the American and French jets that had shadowed the flight for hours. The crew, tense but disciplined, exchanged quick glances, their confidence bolstered by this unexpected ally. Traoré's resolve hardened. The standoff, already a high-stakes gamble, had just escalated into a clash of global powers. The radio crackled once more, this time with a new voice, deep and commanding, speaking in precise English. "This is Russian Air Command. Burkina Faso 1 is under our protection. American and French aircraft, you are interfering with a sovereign nation's flight. Withdraw immediately or face consequences." The words carried weight, backed by the roar of Russian engines now audible through the cabin's walls. The Western jets, caught off guard, maintained their positions but hesitated, their pilots clearly reassessing the situation. Traoré leaned forward, his mind racing. Russia's intervention was no spontaneous act. Putin had anticipated Western resistance, perhaps even orchestrated this show of force to send a message. The summit in Moscow was not just about diplomacy. It was a stage for Russia to assert its role as a defender of nations challenging Western dominance. For Traoré, this moment was personal. Burkina Faso, a small nation often overlooked, now stood at the center of a geopolitical storm, its sovereignty defended by one of the world's most formidable powers. The American commander responded, his tone sharp but less certain. "Russian forces, this is a restricted operation. Burkina Faso 1 is in violation of international airspace protocols. Stand down and allow us to enforce compliance." The French pilot echoed the claim, but their unified front showed cracks. The Russian jets moved closer, their maneuvers precise, signaling readiness for confrontation. The crew of Traoré's plane held their breath, aware that a single miscalculation could ignite a crisis. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity. Traoré remained calm, his eyes fixed on the radar screen relayed to his cabin. He trusted his pilots, but he also knew the Russian intervention had raised the stakes. The world's superpowers were locked in a silent battle, thousands of feet above the Atlantic, over the right of an African leader to chart his nation's course. It was a moment that transcended Burkina Faso, a test of whether Africa could defy the old imperial order. The Russian commander spoke again, his voice unyielding. "We repeat, Burkina Faso 1 is under our escort. Any aggressive action will be met with equal force. Withdraw now." The warning hung in the air, a line drawn in the sky. Traoré's chief aide whispered, "They can't risk a direct clash with Russia. Not over this." Traoré nodded, but he knew the West would not back down easily. Their pride, their influence in Africa, was at stake. Then, slowly, the radar showed movement. The American and French jets began to peel away, their formations loosening as they retreated from the airspace. The Russian jets held their positions, ensuring no sudden reversal. The crew exhaled, relief washing over them, but Traoré remained focused. The retreat was a victory, but it was not the end. The West had been humiliated, and they would seek retribution in other ways. As the plane resumed its steady course toward Moscow, Traoré reflected on the significance of what had happened. Russia's intervention had saved his mission, but it had also exposed the fragility of Western dominance. Burkina Faso had stood firm, backed by a powerful ally, and the world would take notice. The summit in Moscow now carried even greater weight, a chance to cement this moment as a turning point for Africa. The presidential jet soared toward Moscow, its path now clear after the dramatic standoff in the skies. President Ibrahim Traoré sat in silence, the weight of the moment settling over him. The American and French jets had retreated, their retreat a testament to Russia's decisive intervention. Yet Traoré's mind churned with questions. The Russian jets had appeared with uncanny timing, their arrival too precise to be mere coincidence. As the plane descended toward Nikovo Airport, a nagging suspicion took root, one that would soon unravel into a shocking revelation. The standoff had been a victory, but it came with a hidden truth. Unknown to Traoré, the entire confrontation had been orchestrated, not by the West alone, but through a secret agreement between Russian intelligence and a rogue faction within the U.S. military. Putin, ever the strategist, had learned of Western plans to intercept Traoré's flight through a high-level mole in Washington. Rather than warn Burkina Faso outright, he saw an opportunity. He allowed the interception to proceed, knowing it would provide a stage to showcase Russia's power and humiliate the West, all while cementing Burkina Faso's loyalty. The American and French pilots, unaware of the deeper game, followed orders from their compromised chain of command, believing they were enforcing legitimate airspace restrictions. This twist, hidden from Traoré and the world, emerged only hours after the plane landed in Moscow. As Traoré stepped onto the tarmac, greeted by a smiling President Putin and a contingent of Russian officials, he carried the pride of his nation's defiance. The summit awaited, a grand event where African leaders joined Russian counterparts to discuss trade, security, and a new global order. But in a private meeting before the summit, Putin revealed the truth, his voice calm but deliberate. "President Traoré," Putin began, "your courage in the skies was a beacon for Africa. But you must know the full story. The West sought to stop you. Yes, but their actions were guided by our hand. We ensured their jets appeared, knowing we could intervene and turn the moment to our advantage. Your victory was real, but it served a larger purpose." Traoré listened, his expression unreadable. The revelation stunned him. Russia had used Burkina Faso as a pawn in a grander chess game, manipulating the standoff to weaken Western credibility and strengthen Moscow's influence in Africa. The truth cut deep. Traoré had believed the standoff was a pure test of his nation's resolve, a moment where Burkina Faso stood tall against imperialism. Instead, he learned that even his defiance had been shaped by foreign powers. Yet he saw the pragmatism in Putin's strategy. The staged confrontation had elevated Burkina Faso's global standing, inspired African nations, and exposed Western vulnerabilities. The cost was Traoré's trust, but the gain was a stronger platform to pursue his vision of African sovereignty. He chose his response carefully. "President Putin," he said, "your support saved my mission, but this revelation changes how we move forward. Burkina Faso will stand with Russia, but as equals, not as pieces in your game. Africa's future belongs to Africans." Putin nodded, respecting Traoré's clarity. The summit proceeded, with Traoré delivering a powerful speech that called for African unity and independence, his words now laced with a deeper understanding of global politics. The confrontation remained a secret, its orchestrated nature known only to a handful of Russian and Burkinabe officials. The world saw only the triumph of an African leader who defied the West, backed by Russia's might. Traoré returned to Ouagadougou a hero, his people unaware of the manipulation behind their pride. He vowed to use this moment to build a stronger, self-reliant Burkina Faso, one that could navigate the world's power plays without being ensnared. President Ibrahim Traoré returned to Ouagadougou with the weight of the Moscow summit and its shocking revelation etched into his mind. The orchestrated standoff in the skies, a carefully staged drama by Russia to elevate Burkina Faso's defiance, had left him wiser about the world's power games. Yet it also fueled his determination. The world saw him as a hero, a leader who faced down Western jets and emerged victorious with Russia's support. His people, unaware of the manipulation, greeted him with cheers, their pride in Burkina Faso's newfound strength echoing through the streets. Traoré embraced this moment, not as a pawn, but as a catalyst for a broader African awakening. The summit had yielded tangible gains. Russia pledged military training, agricultural investments, and energy partnerships to bolster Burkina Faso's economy. Traoré, wary of over-reliance, also secured commitments from other African leaders present in Moscow. Mali, Niger, and Zimbabwe agreed to form a regional bloc focused on economic self-sufficiency and mutual defense. This alliance, born in the shadow of the standoff, aimed to reduce dependence on Western aid and protect African nations from external interference. Traoré's speech in Moscow, calling for unity and independence, resonated across the continent, sparking debates in capitals from Addis Ababa to Pretoria. Back home, Traoré faced immediate challenges. The West, stung by their retreat in the skies, retaliated with economic measures. Sanctions tightened Burkina Faso's access to global markets, and French companies withdrew from key infrastructure projects. Food prices rose, and whispers of discontent emerged in urban centers. Traoré addressed the nation, his voice steady and resolute. "The West seeks to punish us for choosing our path," he declared. "But we are not alone. Our African brothers stand with us, and our partners in Russia and beyond offer new opportunities. We will build our future with our own hands." He launched a national campaign for resilience, promoting local farming and small-scale industries to counter the sanctions. Villages organized cooperatives, and youth groups trained in new technologies offered by Russian and Chinese partners. Traoré also reached out to India and Brazil, diversifying Burkina Faso's alliances to avoid the trap of trading one foreign master for another. His leadership, forged in the crucible of the standoff, inspired a generation to see Burkina Faso not as a victim, but as a nation with agency. The secret of the orchestrated confrontation remained buried, known only to Traoré, his inner circle, and Russian officials. The world speculated about the standoff, with rumors swirling on social media, but no evidence surfaced. Traoré chose silence, understanding that the truth could undermine the unity he sought to build. Instead, he used the narrative of defiance to rally Africa. At a Pan-African summit in Accra months later, he stood before leaders and declared, "The skies above showed us our strength. No power can silence Africa when we stand together. Let this be the era of our sovereignty." His words ignited a movement. South Africa and Algeria joined the regional bloc, and student protests across the continent demanded an end to neo-colonial influence. The African Union, long criticized for its caution, adopted resolutions supporting economic independence. Traoré's Burkina Faso became a symbol, proof that a small nation could shift the global balance when backed by courage and strategic alliances. In private, Traoré reflected on the cost of the standoff. The manipulation by Russia had bruised his trust, but it also taught him a vital lesson. Sovereignty required vigilance, not just against enemies, but also allies. He vowed to navigate the world's complexities with clarity, ensuring Burkina Faso's partnerships served its people, not foreign agendas. The standoff, though a stage drama, had sparked a real revolution in African consciousness. As months turned to years, Traoré's legacy grew. Burkina Faso, once a footnote in global affairs, emerged as a leader in the new Africa, a continent shedding its chains. The standoff in the skies, a fleeting moment, lived on as a legend, a reminder that courage and unity could rewrite history. Traoré, forever shaped by that day, stood as a guardian of his nation's dreams, determined to carve a future where Africa answered to no one but itself.